So I'd just like to introduce Mr. Stephen Rue, who's the Chief Executive Officer for NBN Co. Mr. Rue commenced as the Chief Executive Officer of NBN on the 1st of September in 2018. And prior to this, Mr. Rue was the Chief Financial Officer of NBN Co. and was responsible for the financial management of NBN Co.'s business activities, business planning, financial reporting, financial control, management reporting, taxation and treasury, as well as procurement and supplier. Mr. Rue joined NBN Co. in 2014 as a member of their executive committee and brought with him a wealth of knowledge in financial management and high-profile company transformation. He's also a chartered accountant and holds a Bachelor of Business Studies and a diploma in professional accounting. And given the recent work we've been doing with him, it's my pleasure to introduce Stephen, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about NBN's program of work. Thank you, Stephen.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Chris Dowling, for that very warm welcome. And if I could just say, Chris, you've been instrumental to the partnership we've had with the Victorian government. So on a personal note, thank you so much for your contribution there. And also thank you to Chris James for hosting the event today. And let me just say, never ever has data analytics and innovation been so important. I'd also like to start by acknowledging and giving thanks to the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. And of course, we pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. So welcome to my home in Sydney, but don't get off put by the fact that I'm a Sydney-sider for 30 years. I do have an enormous love and affinity to Melbourne and indeed to Victoria in general. Half, in fact, of my NBN team reside and work out of Melbourne. But in my past life, I was also had the privilege of being the chairman of Melbourne Storm Rugby League Club between 2010 and 2013. And of course, for those of you who know about rugby league, you do know that in 2012, the Storm won the flag that year. So an enormous affinity and history with Melbourne, I assure you. Can I thank you, Jane Garrett, for attending today? And can I also express enormous thanks to Ministers Jana Pulford and, of course, Treasurer Tim Pallas. As Chris has mentioned, and many of you would have been aware, we recently signed a landmark agreement with the Victorian government to co-invest with them and to deliver more fibre and faster broadband services to more areas of Victoria. And I will say a little bit more about that later, but I would like to acknowledge up front the vision and commitment that both Minister Pulford and Treasurer Pallas has shown in making this partnership a reality. You would have seen the recent release of the Victorian government's infrastructure strategy. And I can say that this state has in place a very well-defined and ambitious plan to reduce disadvantage, to build on its economic strengths and address the major environmental risks of our time. And I was particularly pleased to see within this strategy a huge focus on embracing and adapting technology transformation, on harnessing infrastructure for productivity and growth, and on the importance of developing the regional and rural areas of Victoria. And these are really key areas that absolutely are consistent with our purpose at NBN. And our purpose is to lift the digital capability of Australia. And this is something that I talk about constantly, both internally and externally, that NBN exists effectively to provide additional economic and social benefits across all Australia and to lift digital capability to do that. This is absolutely essential if we're going to continue as a strong nation, as an equal nation, and as an economic powerhouse. Also, it's crucial, digital capability is crucial as we navigate our recovery from the impacts that COVID-19, of course, has caused. And I'll say more on some of these themes later, but I'd just like to run you through the topics that I'd like to talk to today. So firstly, I'll talk about what NBN is and what we do, and the role we play in connecting Australian homes and businesses to the opportunities made possible by having ubiquitous broadband access across Australia. I'll also speak about the importance of this connectivity to our social and economic well-being and the role that NBN has played in keeping the nation connected during the COVID-19 crisis. And finally, I will talk about some macro themes like the increased regionalisation of communities and better healthcare access that we see playing out in Australia as we become more and more digitally connected. But first, let me start with NBN. NBN, of course, is the federal government-owned, wholesale-only company that provides high-speed broadband access to homes and businesses across the entire country. And essentially, internet providers purchase wholesale access from us, which is then sold on to homes and businesses as retail and business internet plans. Or to put it very simply, we are the digital backbone that delivers high-speed broadband to your doorstep. So if you think about electricity and gas distributors who keep our lights and heating running, we are the utility that makes Australia's internet work. But more than just keeping internet working, we also exist to transform the Australia's telecommunication market through major structural reform. And this is an important policy goal that was set out right at the very start of NBN, in fact, back in 2009. And this has been very successful in improving the competitiveness of the retail internet sector, and indeed in improving services in the bush. More recently, the connectivity provided by these policy goals absolutely helped us withstand the challenges of COVID. Think about lockdowns. Lockdowns would never, can you imagine having been in lockdown without the ability to have high-speed broadband? So over the past decade, we've been working really hard to build this digital backbone that is NBN. In fact, we've built one of the world's largest and ubiquitous broadband networks that passes 12 million homes and businesses throughout regional, remote and metropolitan areas. And today, more than 8.25 million residential and business premises are now connected to the NBN network, or covering just over 17 million Australians. As for the rollout across Victoria, we've made over 3.1 million premises ready to connect to NBN, and as of today, more than 2.1 million homes and businesses are connected to the network. So if you think about the entirety of Victorian state, we've connected homes and businesses of all sizes, from small cafes in Flinders Lane to Flinders Station itself. We've even connected Rod Laver area, the MCG and St Paul's Cathedral. And like the rest of Australia, the build in Victoria has been incredibly complex, as you can imagine. So take, for example, Mallacoota in Far East Victoria. Before NBN came along, Mallacoota was a town that was stuck on the ADSL era technology for decades. And just months before it was about to go live on NBN, it was hit by the devastating bushfire of 2020. Which tore through that region, and as part of that, it incinerated the aerial backhaul link that connected the town. So after we established interim communication services for the town, our people got to work in rebuilding the infrastructure in that area. A massive complex build. It involved getting approvals from, for example, Parks Australia, Aboriginal Victoria and Gippsland Council. This time we also went underground rather than using aerial. We laid 62 kilometres of cables, ducts, pits and joints between Can River and Mallacoota, including through the National Park. But today the township and its 1,000 premises are now reconnected and enjoying the benefits of broadband. So this is just one example how we regularly work with state and territories to help ensure communities are connected to vital communications. So having completed the initial build of the network last year, we're now in the midst of NBN's next evolution with a $4.5 billion new investment to increase the capability, reach and value of this crucial asset. So this investment will see us extend our fibre networks deeper into communities so that we can continue to meet the digital needs of households and businesses, both today, but importantly into the future. By 2023, that means that 3 in 4 of all NBN fixed line footprint, that's all footprint outside of fixed wireless and satellite areas, that will have access to download speeds of up to 1 gigabit per second. We're also making significant investments, as we've heard up front, to boost the connectivity for businesses of all sizes with the creation of dedicated business fibre zones. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And for rural and regional Australia, we last year launched a $300 million co-investment fund to increase regional and rural Australia's access to reliable, fast, secure and resilient broadband services. So with the path set to evolve the reach and capability of NBN, we as a nation now really need to think how we make the most of that connectivity to ensure we meet the challenges, not just of today, but frankly, to help us build a stronger economy and a society into the future. So COVID has caused a huge disruption to our lives, but I do actually think it's created real opportunities for us to fundamentally think how we work in the future, how we plan our cities, in fact, how we commute, how we entertain, how we learn, how we connect with each other. And notwithstanding the devastating health impact inflicted by COVID around the world, I do think that this confluence of the risks of COVID and the opportunities of technology actually places us at a rare inflection point in history. So the usual forces that drive technology change and adoption, like competition or ubiquity of access or globalization, has been pushing very much at how we change health or education or work for years. But the pandemic absolutely accelerated the decisions of individuals, of businesses, of our institutions, in fact, even our political systems, to embrace what was thought of only a few years ago, what was possible. And that's now being made real due to technology. So let me just quote you some Australian Bureau of Statistics. So COVID restrictions has coincided with the accelerated use of a lot of business and consumer applications. So if you take work video calls, they're up 75% in the last 18 months. Online health services are up 67%. Online education is up 58%. And as you'd all know, online grocery shopping is up 38%. So if you put that into perspective, what McKinsey recently said is that COVID has caused changes in the last 12 months to technology adoption that otherwise would have taken probably 4 years to play out. So many of you, in fact, probably all of you are at home at the moment, and you'll have noticed this through your increased online shopping, or maybe you've added a new security sensor, or maybe you've bought a digital assistant for your kitchen. Maybe you've bought additional digital tools, iPads, iPhones, or new television. But on a macro level, we're absolutely seeing the widespread use of this digital connectivity change behaviors of people. And at the end of the day, technology is interesting to technologists, but it's all about people. It's all about consumer behavior. So obviously we've seen workplaces shift from the office to the home, and I don't think that's going to completely reverse in the future. Our children have adapted to studying and learning from home. Broadband technology has actually become the only way that we've been able to see friends and relatives. And for many people, it's been the safest way to see their doctor. And many, many small businesses have now pivoted to the online world with new markets and, in fact, new customers. So as we move towards a more digital economy and the lifestyle it enables, I do think there'll be a huge flow on to regional and rural Australia that will positively benefit those areas. We're absolutely seeing this play out across the whole nation at the moment. If you take though Victoria, the Infrastructure Victoria Chief Executive Michael Masson recently noted that much of the demand we're seeing for new infrastructure is seen in the outer regions of cities and regional areas. So to quote Mr. Masson, by better connecting outer suburban growth areas and the regions to Melbourne, we can provide fairer access to jobs, to transport and services for all, regardless of postcode. And I do think that this broadband connectivity is crucial to making this a reality. So it is estimated that Melbourne's outer northern and western suburbs will attract perhaps up to 800,000 new residents in the next 30 years. And we're seeing this at NBN across the whole of Australia. And in fact, the first 5 quarters of the COVID pandemic, so the last 5, which is the last 5 quarters or the last 15 months, we've seen net migration out of our capital cities and into the regions of actually 55,000 people. Put it another way, that's 120 people a day moving into regional areas. Some have called this migration to peri-urban and regional centres as the Great Reshuffling. And this has triggered a demographic shift from cities to regional and urban fringe areas, resulting in job growth for those areas. And in fact, more than 66,000 jobs in April this year, which was the highest since the mining boom a decade ago. And I have no doubt that this great reshuffling will be a boom for the regions. increasing access and usage, therefore, of broadband services in regional and rural areas. And of course, digital skills, online education, and better healthcare that comes with it will lead to increased growth in population and jobs, higher rates of business creation, lower unemployment rates, and in fact, more equal services. And talking about services, broadband connectivity can also improve health and life outcomes by offering access to remote healthcare providers, online social networks, and education opportunities. This has absolutely been evidenced in the last 18 months with the take-up of telehealth consultations. What used to be done in a hospital or a GP's office can now be done at home. And in fact, with population shifts to regional areas with an aging population, it's now become a necessity, in fact, to treat patients from the comfort of their own home. And the ability to treat patients remotely thanks to connectivity is even more important when you consider the disproportional number of doctors in urban areas that creates a healthcare scarcity in rural and regional areas. So the rise in healthcare services is also critical in helping limit the spread of COVID into our more vulnerable communities. So take, for example, Dr. Tony Bongiorno in Ballarat. So as COVID struck last year, Tony quickly embraced telehealth and video conferencing as a key defense to prevent the further spread of virus in the community and to improve his patients' care. In fact, Tony says that this shift to the online world of patient care has been a game changer for people who traditionally lack medical services because of their isolation or, in fact, their frailty. It's allowed busy parents to avoid the chaos, of course, of bundling kids into cars and waiting in waiting rooms. And for Indigenous patients in remote areas where communities often lack these health services, it's provided far simpler ways to communicate with their doctor. Prior to the pandemic, Dr. Bongiorno told us that this would never have happened in a million years. That's a quote he told me. So the final theme I'd like to speak to today is how we can better support businesses of all sizes to take advantage of digital opportunities that broadband access enables. So we all know that businesses power the economic, that small and medium business in particular, the economic powerhouse of the nation. But frankly, without the digital tools to participate on a global stage or a local stage, good intentions and hard work may well wither in the vine. So I do believe the most important thing we can do is to build the right environment for digital businesses to thrive, to help foster communities and cities where the use and adoption of digital tools, skills, and technologies actually becomes the norm in the home and the norm in businesses. This is why we continue to make significant investments to support Australia's small and medium businesses. So working in partnership with internet providers, last year we committed up to $700 million of initiatives to support business innovation, productivity and growth over the 4 to 5 year period. And so far, this investment has included the creation of 284 business fibre zones nationally, which covers actually 850,000 businesses. And these zones are giving businesses access to symmetrical download and upload speeds of up to 1 gigabit per second at very significantly reduced wholesale prices. And as I mentioned earlier, last week we signed a landmark agreement with the Victorian government that will see significant co-investment between NBN and the Victorian government to deliver more fibre and faster broadband services across Victoria. As part of this deal, the Victorian government has committed $73 million to establish the Victorian Gigabit State Programme Fund to be held on trust by NBN Co for co-funding new broadband infrastructure in key areas of the state. And through this partnership, we'll start by creating 11 new business fibre zones, covering about 10,000 businesses in Victorian suburbs and towns like Benalla, Hamilton and Lara, to mention a few. And we're delighted to work with the Victorian government to identify opportunities to co-invest and deliver new NBN infrastructure to support this very visionary Connecting Victoria programme. And these investments in smart infrastructure are not just, by the way, about delivering speed. They're also about providing network infrastructure in new areas, which will kickstart competition for small and medium businesses wherever they may be. So in conclusion then, digitising our regions, in enhancing healthcare opportunities for patients, and creating new employment opportunities through the support of Australian businesses are going to be absolutely critical as we recover from the impacts of COVID. And it is easy to be distracted by the myopia caused by COVID, there's no doubt, but particularly when the return to normality for all of us seems so far off. But with strong vision and a clear strategy to get there and the will to commit, I'm absolutely convinced that Australia will come out of this stronger than ever before. And that's why the infrastructure strategy laid out by the Victorian State Government is so important, and why we at NBN are absolutely committed to supporting and doing our part to help the nation and indeed Victoria bounce back from this pandemic. So at this stage, I'd like to hand back to you, Chris James, but I am very happy to answer any questions you may have. I'm very used to answering lots of questions, so please don't be shy, and I'll answer whatever you would like me to do. So Chris James, back to you.
No, thank you kindly, Stephen. That was fascinating, particularly some of the stats around digital uptake. And while I wait for the questions to come through the chat, I'd just ask you, firstly, how's the network performed during COVID? And do you think that digital uptake is to some extent a permanent step change, or will we go back to the old normal?
Yeah, well, the answer, Chris, to how the networks performed has been remarkably well. Actually, we've seen a dramatic rise in data in the evening time. So and I'll talk about the start of the pandemic in a minute, but we've seen data in March 2020 grew overnight 40% during the busy hour time, which is the 8 to 10 o'clock time frame. But interestingly, during the day, data grew by over 100%. So this is when you can see, in fact, when the kids, today you can see it still, when kids come into school and when they leave. And you can see when people go on lunch breaks from 1 to 2. So the growth in traffic during the day has absolutely supported people in their business activities and their education activities. The first couple of weeks, in fact, I was due to travel with my daughter to the Melbourne Grand Prix in March 2020. It was on, I think, the 17th of March. And at that stage, it became obvious when the Grand Prix was cancelled that Australia too was going to go into lockdown. So we very quickly worked with our retail partners to put capacity in the network. It took about 2 weeks. For the first 2 weeks, there was a little bit of variability in service. But after that 2-week period, where both we and our retail partners had increased the capability of our networks, quite frankly, we've seen an almost seamless ability of the network to stand to ongoing growths in traffic. We can see still when Sydney went into lockdown, traffic grew over 21%. Interestingly, Victoria went into lockdown and grew 31%. So again, those step changes in data growth overnight, we've been able to significantly cope with. In answer to your second question, though, do I see this as permanent? Absolutely. I think we're in a decade of big change. I talked about people moving to regional Australia. I don't think that's going to change. In fact, I think it's going to continue. But also, we're seeing the inevitable decarbonisation of the economy, and that will lead to transition changes for parts of the Hunter Valley in New South Wales up into southeast Queensland, for example. But the other big change is the digitisation of the economy, and with new businesses being created, new job skills being needed as well, though, to be able to deal with the ongoing digitization of how we operate and how we run a business, and in fact your own field, how we create the right data and we use that data to innovate our businesses, create new markets, but also take costs out of our business. And also the opportunity to live and work anywhere also, I think, will stimulate further and further use of digital services. But it's not just about what we do at NBN, it's also about capability. And the one thing that I think we do as a nation need to think about is the upskilling of people in digital capability, essentially, whether it be to conduct their lives or run their business. And the usage of software from the clouds, or the ability to have a great website, or to, as I said earlier, to use data to take your course out is something that has advanced, no doubt, in the last 18 months, but there's still, I think, a long way to go, Chris. So the answer to your question is that this ain't reversing. This will continue to accelerate, in my view.
Very much so, Stephen, and I think we'd agree with you. The comment that data is the new oil is very much apt, and we're finding that businesses are really only using about 10% of the data that they're sitting on in our travels. So I think you're right there. There's a fair way to go. We do have a question from Gerard Blood at La Trobe University, and he asks, Stephen, if you could comment on the relativity between 5G and NBN fibre in terms of its efficacy and relative application.
Yeah, I think we're in a quite an exciting stage in Australia, in fact, through the world, because I do think that both the combination of the high-speed broadband that NBN provides, but also the new capabilities of 5G will actually help accelerate many of the innovations and the data use that we've been briefly touching on. 5G is a step change in terms of mobile capability. It's also for the mobile operators, the ability to use spectrum more efficiently is also a more efficient way, in fact, to run their business, which should help them with their cost base as well. But at the end of the day, most traffic is carried over fixed line networks. In fact, it's just over 90% of all traffic is carried on a fixed line network. And the reason for that is because that's what they're built for. Particularly fiber networks are built to carry large volumes of data. So when I say fiber networks, our fiber to the node or our HFC networks, of course, are largely fiber networks. Although the last piece may be through coax or through copper. But fiber networks are built to carry huge amounts of data, whereas a 5G network, while it is a step change in terms of capability from 4G, still is not necessarily built, because it's very much a shared network where you use it's many people using the same spectrum, is not really built to carry the same volume of data. So there's no doubt that in the short term there is some interchangeability for some people who are lower data users between a mobile network or fixed line network. But we've seen data grow 25% plus in the last few years, and although that data growth may eventually slightly slow down, it's never going to completely cease. Currently, our network carries around about around about 400 gigabytes a month, and we see that going to this on average per user. We see that going to over 1,000 in the next few years. So I think when I think about 5G, I think about its ability for things like IoT in businesses, or its ability to provide people a better mobile connectivity. But when I think about our network, the reason I talk about a digital backbone is that it will continue to do the heavy lifting of large volumes of data, and will be those two networks together, I think, will over the next decade really move, not just Australia, but internationally, will move the world forward from a technology point of view.
Thanks for that answer, Stephen. I had one further question about business fibre zones, and we found certainly that lack of access to high-speed broadband traditionally was a top 3 issue in Melbourne's north, and that it particularly affected businesses on the outer edge of industrial estates. We found a couple of years ago some of them were still on dial-up, or they're on very low-grade ADSL, and often had to talk to their neighbours when they wanted to upload or download a big file. So that was a real productivity issue in the north, and we've found that the NBN rolling out has made a difference. In terms of the business fibre zones, and we do have a number of them in the north and in the west as well, what is the step change for business? What are the sort of exact benefits of going off that basic plan and going direct to fibre?
Yeah, well, what we saw, Chris, was two things. That there was there was not necessarily the infrastructure for many of the businesses that you talked about to be able to access high-speed broadband. I'll come to the benefits in a minute. But the second piece was that even if they could access it, it wasn't necessarily at affordable rates. So what we have seen in the past, where the telecommunication industry had a zonal pricing structure, whereby if you lived in the CBD, you got a certain rate, but the further you moved away from CBDs, and particularly into regional areas, the cost of those to having access to higher speed broadband became much higher. So we therefore came up with the concept of a business fibre zone, whereby you would have access to basically our highest grade services. So 1 gigabit per second down and 1 gigabit per second up, essentially. But not only that, we also moved our wholesale prices so that within those business fibre zones, you could purchase at the retailers could purchase from us at a wholesale price equal to what they could purchase from us in the CBDs. And they in turn then naturally pass on that lower cost to their customers. What we also did was say that in those business fibre zones, if a business signed up to a 3-year contract, that we would actually do the build at no cost as well. So this is really for many small and medium businesses a game changer if you live in the outer suburbs, or if you live in a regional area of in this case Victoria. Why does it benefit though then? But again, when you talked about businesses only using 10% of data, and often you may think that, well, this applies to a digital camera shop. But if you think about a real estate agent, in fact, if you even think of a funeral home, and what do funeral homes do? So many autopsies they upload. And I use that as an example if you think about that, many businesses need the ability to have both access upstream and also downstream, particularly if they employ 2, 5, 10 people who need access the whole time. And what this will do is provide small and medium businesses with much greater technology capability to be able to run their business more efficiently, not to go to the next door neighbor, as you say, but also to be able to access more and more applications. And make no mistake about it, that one of the great things of ubiquitous broadband is that new applications will be created. New businesses can be created from that, and those applications are often data hungry and therefore need more bandwidth to be able to run them well and efficiently. So to our extent, the business fibre zones has stimulated opportunities for small and medium business in particular, but it's also actually stimulated the market, which has been good, and it's created more competition. And of course, that's fundamentally what NBN was about, as I said right up front, to create more retail competition, which is great for consumers. One other thing I'd say earlier on your earlier comment, Chris, I think we found during the pandemic that people start to understand what NBN does and what a retailer does. They start to understand the importance of Wi-Fi and how it works. They start to understand the need for new equipment and also started to learn a bit about how to run their business in a more digital way, or how to work from home in a more digital way. But I still think there's quite a way to go in terms of educating small and medium business, and it is a challenge, but in terms of educating them on how they best use that data, or how they best use that digital capability. And it's something that we at NBN turn our minds to, but I do think it's something that nationally we need to think about.
Thank you, Stephen. And look, we are working with NBN on making people aware of those business fibre zones, both in the north and the west of Melbourne. We're doing a rollout of events, making businesses in particular aware of those so they can take advantage of them if needs be. There being no further questions in the chat, I would like to thank you on behalf of everyone, Stephen. Really appreciate you making yourself available to us today to have a chat and answer questions, and also look forward to working with you into the digital future.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. I'm delighted to be here, and hopefully that was of interest and use for people. So thank you.
Very much was. Thank you.